So this will be a lecture on the isolation of intelligence, the isolation of human genius. So when we want to talk about the forces and fields that are active in, we'll just localize it and say the solar system. So you could say the planet Jupiter, the planet Earth, they have a force and a field and a frequency which can be measured and have been measured by modern science. Sorts of poles and masses that are active in a local area. This also applies to, of course, a river or a boulder or a group of human beings. These are all interactions that are occurring on a certain spectrum of light with certain densities that are interfacing both locally and non-locally. This is, again, the quantum mechanics principle, non-locality. Because this is all occurring on a macro-evolutionary, macrocosmic, universal scale that all matter and all beings and beingness is being thrust into the forefront and vanguard of being. This is to say that all beings incarnate are sort of being dragged toward the evolutionary edge of peril, or the vanguard of being, the edge of the abyss to which one jumps off and sort of free falls into a new paradigm of existence, and somehow either hopes to land or builds the landing as one is falling, gesticulates and gestures into a new paradise or a new realm of existence, because you leave the Garden of Eden, you leave the Garden of the Known, you leave the Garden of the evolutionary sort of base camp and fly into this new realm. The isolation of genius is the isolation of the absolute vanguard of the evolution of consciousness. So this is to be saying to stand on the ledge of consciousness. And this is obviously a few and far between fields, as many people still gesture toward minds of hundreds, if not hundreds of, 100, if not hundreds, if not thousands of years ago, in our very limited scale of human evolutionary documentation, which is a span of maybe 5,000 years. This is an incredibly small period of time. If you're talking about the glaciation of history, the evolution of human consciousness that has actually been captured and put to record as some sort of possible reference point, 5,000 years of human history is nothing. And if you want to talk about the past 100 years of human evolution, this is billions of people who have been brought into existence. This is an incredibly novel period of time where at once that there were below several million not too long ago, and then even smaller amounts furthermore. I believe it was a 4 billion population boom in the span of 1970 or the 1950s to the modern day here in the 2020s. This is massive. It's a massive leap. And so we have so few figures, right? If you want to think about the astronomical probability of genius, the existence of genius, this is truly a generational quality. There's this very small pocket of course, the minds of this time were drawn toward the vanguard. In our time now, I guess it's going to be artificial intelligence, but the vanguard of quantum physics and quantum mechanics in the early 1900s. You have maybe several dozen visual artists who are truly pioneers, and you've essentially have a global civilization at this point in time in human history that relies entirely, as the vast majority of human history has, upon the cultural or tribal state of normalcy that's fostered by way of various different sort of legislative boundaries and borders that form the walls of the city or the citadel or the kingdom. This is the laws of, you could say the laws of God as handed down to Moses and carved into the stone, or the laws of the parliament, the laws of the government, the laws of the tribe. And these are the sort of discursive borders and bounds of the culture. And to in any way infringe upon these or go beyond them is to venture out into the wilderness. And the entirety of what culture is predicated upon is the fervent belief and following of these rules in order to maintain a state of civil society that borders upon the very unrest of death as in the unrest of this sort of decivilization of the cosmos, which is threatening at any given moment to break apart the very fragile bounds and borders of a rule-making society in the very nature of the evolution of the cosmos and the evolution of consciousness. But this is held together by a shoestring. And what is faced each day by these people who are of sort of religious adherence to culture and to society is that they are grasping onto definitions that are forged and fostered by philosophical movements. You could say modern Western civilization is by and large predicated upon ancient Greek philosophy and Enlightenment era philosophy. Rousseau, Voltaire, as well as obviously the sort of foundation provided by Plato and Aristotle in the most general and mainstream sense. This is not even getting into the proto-Gnostic sort of philosophical underpinnings of so much of ancient Greek philosophy, as well as the mystery school initiatory traditions that inform that philosophy, and the Greek and the Canaanite. And there's so much cross-pollination that occurs at an esoteric level that form the borders and bounds of these societies. But these philosophies are formed by the very few and far between who are not obviously Plato and Aristotle and Socrates. Socrates was not formative at all for the Greek philosophical tradition. He was effectively crucified by the public. You could say the same now about what has now been incorporated into the cosmological quote-unquote reality of modern Western civilization, Galileo. In Galileo's work, there's the reality and the truth is crucified. So what you face and what you see as being faced here is that the revelation or the uncovering of genius, what occurs here and what it does, and obviously this applies to Christ as well, the uncovering of genius, whether it's spiritual or empirical genius, faces a immense societal and civilizational backlash, because what it does is, again, this is kind of a very shamanic notion, is that when genius or when true intellect ventures out into the wilderness, as it must, what it uncovers is almost always ad infinitum, bar none, a threat to the civilization or the culture or the society as it stands, because what is disruptive to a civilization or a society or a culture is knowledge. We're not talking about information here. Information is easily propagated as truth or lie. It can be said to be told to be anything. But what is a threat to the order of culture is knowledge. And what knowledge does is it always expands the borders and the purview and the vision of an existing ideological mechanism. So this is to say that ideology and culture are the number one threats to knowledge. Because any sort of belief system, and this is something that is quotable from the Baudelaire, he says, I attempted as to be as my friends to subscribe to any sort of system, a philosophical system, belief system, and each time it failed, and I was left to reside in this impeccable naivete. What genius realizes is there is not a possible mold through which to foster some sort of permanent truth, because what happens with these models is that these models collapse, and these models collapse and fall under the weight of cosmological time. And what cosmological time is it's the return without returning to the permanent roots and underpinnings of the foundation of life and existence, which is this kind of shining black effervescent creative possibility and potentiality. And in the face of this, humanity is left with nothing. There is nothing to hold on to. There's no latch key. There's no door with which to insert the latch key. There's no philosophical system or apotheosis that remains but this perennial state of creation on the abyssal ledge of something else, some slouching beast toward Bethlehem in the Yeats, the words of Yeats in the poem Second Coming. What is required here, obviously, right, in the course of the working of the evolution of consciousness, there there is a heat explosion, which is a life of something else and a death of something else, and in the process of the cooling of the universe, you have these things that appear, and what is required is for these things that appear to be apocalyptic and revelatory, for these things that appear to be the cutting edge of creation and to be entirely another explosion of cosmic fire unto themselves. What is called for is a sort of creative gastronomy of human existence, of life. And what is possible and what is capable in the life of the human being is the very life itself. And this is the sort of container or the cauldron with which the witches brew, and Macbeth ventures toward in the opening scenes, is that there is this sort of mystical force at work that is non-conforming. It is the formless which forms the form and thus takes the form away and steals it very back to the source of the nonconformity and the formlessness itself. And this is the very sort of lawless essence that is the very formation of all that which modern science perceives to be law. So when we are discussing chaos in this sense, we're looking deep into the pattern of chaos and discerning order in the chaos, in that chaos forms the very definition of order to which any sort of system or logic can possibly be subscribed or prescribed. When we're working with this kind of primordial chaos, we're working with the essence of life, and this is the creative possibility and potentiality. And of course, this is the order of genius and the recognition of genius and what genius recognizes. For to be with the essence of life is to not even speak this language or that language, or to conform to anything. It is to exist in a permanent state of lawlessness alongside and with and as the truth of the universe and the cosmos. For all that appears today to be law appears tomorrow to be utter lawlessness and chaos and nonsense. But the scale at which we perceive this movement between order and chaos, the magnitude of which we actually have the sort of human knowledge or database to recognize the movement between chaos and lawlessness and law and order, is so small. The relative perspective is like taking a grain of sand to being the entirety of the Atlantic Ocean. It's the what en masse has barely even but been glimpsed. So when we look deep into chaos, this is, again, you can refer to the Nietzsche here, a great quote. When you look into the abyss looks back into you. To stare into the source and essence of the primordial chaos is to stare into the heart and roots and soil and soul of yourself. And this is where we see, of course, all of the cultural borders, taboos, and boundaries are utterly broken, and we exist as this primordial substance which neither appears to be anything but yet gesticulates itself into existence, and its behavior is entirely unclassifiable and uncategorical. When we discuss sorts of alien presences or things along these lines, what is utterly alien and the presence of what is utterly alien is consciousness itself. And for the human being to discern and stand in light of consciousness is to stand in the face of the wholly other, the entirely other, and we stand in this sense in the face of God. And yet what we do is we attempt to turn away from it, or we attempt to extinguish it with substance abuse, or we tune it into daytime television, or we otherwise fail to cultivate this sort of work of the recognition of the soul self, or the cosmic consciousness that resides within us, and resides with us as us. But it's like standing at the blacksmith's forge with no iron hot enough to fashion or brand the sword through which to cleave through reality. We stand in this jungle, and yet we have this blunt and dull instrument that we have no idea about. We have no idea it even exists, and thus we stand there naked and disabused. much like the very moments after ingesting the apple in the Garden of Eden, there needs to be the fleeing from paradise is the fashioning of the tool of consciousness. And when paradise is fleed and left, that is the beginning. That is the beginning of this process of enlightenment to the nature, foundation, and fabric of human consciousness, which is the very cosmic life work of God in recognition of itself. This cannot be overstated. And what we face here as a culture and as a society is a failure to recognize this and the disabusal of it, and the in fact turning away from it, or the disabusing the value of it in the same way that the sort of rainforests and kind of a priori conditions for it have been disabused, that it has risen up out of this framework of nature and appears almost to be, again, entirely alien. But what does it do? In fear, it glimpses itself in the mirror and proceeds to mutilate everything around it in a fury and a terror. It's almost like the current condition of humanity cannot bear to handle the recognition of itself as this sort of great being of cosmic love, right? And it turns away and tears away from the source and root of its being into a extended self-violence or violence against itself, to in one fell swoop institute a defense budget of several $1 trillion and burn the rainforest to the ground is to turn away from oneself, and not only to turn away from oneself, but attempt self-mutilation or decapitation by one's own hands. It's this sense of guilt and shame that I'm not going to say believe, that is being conveyed by contemporary human society and culture, in that it can no longer turn away from itself and point to the God elsewhere or the holy other elsewhere, but that it is being faced with this confrontation that the holy other is not only within me, it is myself, as in the cosmic divine consciousness itself, and that there is no separation here. When these wars are waged, there is, on the most superficial level, the war for oil, the war for resources, the war for grain, or the war for regional power, and the war to enslave others to the civilizational project. But we cannot have these wars without at first there being this war within of separation and fear of that nature that is born within us and has birthed us into existence. This is of course the violence against the not only the Great Mother in terms of the kind of primordial chaos through which all creation is birthed, but the very earth itself and all that stands within symbolically for the quote-unquote feminine, or the birthing mechanism. It's this attempt to bypass that very creative power and potential which is the call of the human. And this is what we're talking about when we're talking about the institution of civilizational and cultural borders and bounds, which exist as preventative measures for true creation. For if true creation was given free rein, as we do see in genius and revolutionary genius, again, this is a very, very small, you know genius when you see it. You know the genius of Einstein, you know the genius of Van Gogh. It's not something that, it is something that emerges from within, and it has no categorical analog. It's not a cultural dispensation. It's not a regurgitation of some semantic language. It is the force of the spirit acting through the being, living through the being, and that being is the vessel and the transmutative, the transubstantiating, the very sacrament through which the life force of the spirit and the blood of the spirit flows and is manifest and manifesting, creating, growing, living, being. And this is, of course, the genius of the cosmos, but for this to be harnessed through the human being, there must be life.